right, what's going on, y'all? So we are just out of our first meeting of this Mastering Real Food for a Lifetime progression. At this first meeting, we covered the basics of real food, and we basically made an argument for why we choose our definition of real food. And we went through a lot of information to get to that point. I felt like it was really necessary information because the majority of people that are trying to figure out this kind of real food nutrition thing have a really hard time with it because they don't understand the stuff that we covered. And then as I'm going through this information, I'm trying to figure out like what is the most useful and important information I want people to take away from that, because that was a lot of info, right? My goal is to send you little tidbits of information as we're going throughout this process to kind of reinforce what it is that we're talking about learning. So what is the most important information that we talked about at this meeting, aside from making this argument for why we choose our definition of real food? One of the questions that came up was this, trying to fully understand this concept around nutrient density and eating for nutrients, okay? So, we talked about how this digestive system that we have is very flexible, very adaptive. It can basically get nutrients from anything that we can consume, and we see that in this modern world. We've got people that are 100% vegan, like 100% plants, and we've got people that are 100% animal-based, and everything in between. And we have people in all those different methodologies and modalities and all throughout that spectrum that are surviving, that are pulling the nutrients from those foods they need to make this body function and to build this body, right? We also see people that are eating nothing but processed food for their entire life. They're eating nothing but processed food and Cokes and soft drinks and what we would consider to be the most horrific, wrong thing in the world. And we'll say it with a lot of compassion, because a lot of those people are probably unaware that they're unaware, or maybe they don't care. But anyway, but even people that are eating nothing but processed food, their bodies still somehow are able to function and somehow able to build, okay? So it's like this flexible adaptive system, digestive system, can pull nutrients from a lot of different things. It can survive in any situation. But now the question is, because we have access to modern grocery stores and we have access to pretty much anything that we want 365 days a year, the question is, what is the best thing for us to consume? That's why we talked about this whole evolutionary piece of it. You know, how our brain size increase, starting 2.5 million years ago, we had this exponential increase in brain size that continued to about maybe 50 or 60,000 years ago. And also we had this shrinking of our digestive system and the shrinking of the colon that all coincided with the introduction of animal foods. And that started with us being scavengers and then moving towards being hunters and probably top-level predators. And so why did this happen? How did this happen? Well, when you think about the nutrients contained in a piece of animal food, like a piece of meat has a lot of beneficial nutrients in it. It has proteins and amino acids and fatty acids and minerals and vitamins, and it's really dense and packed with that stuff. If I take some leaves from what a folivore might eat, a folivore is like a herbivore, but it's like a gorilla that's eating a lot of leaves and stuff like that. You have to have a lot of leaves, a lot of grass, a lot of plant matter to equate the same amount of nutrients that you get jam-packed into a piece of meat. So it kind of makes sense that when our digestive system started getting hold of this much more nutrient-dense and calorically dense animal foods versus the plant foods that we were eating before, then it facilitated a change in our physiology. All of a sudden, our brain started to get more of what it needed, and natural selection pressure favored these bigger brains and smaller digestive systems. The digestive system kind of geared itself more towards nutrient density and caloric density, meaning that the digestive system responded to and naturally selected those that were able to assimilate these animal foods better. Because when you think about it, when I consume animal foods, I'm going straight to the source. If I consume a lot of plants, if I'm a folivore, a gorilla with a hindgut fermentation system, I'm consuming leaves and plants all day long because I have to ferment all those plants into something usable by my body, usually short-chain fatty acids and some other nutrients. Right? So now with this digestive system, the introduction of animal foods, it's almost like we're going straight to the source. Instead of fermenting a bunch of plant matter, we can just eat the nutrients that we need versus converting them through fermentation. And so this happened over that 2.5 million year time span. Our brains kept getting bigger, we kept getting better at hunting and being these top level predators, and we kept eating more and more animal foods. And I'm sure our ancestors prioritized animal foods when they were available. And this facilitated for even more brain growth and more shrinking of our digestive system and less of a capacity to ferment plant matter. And then at some point around 50 to 60,000 years ago, all over the world, we invented agriculture. We settled in these different places on the planet, and instead of roaming the earth being hunter-gatherers, we learned that, hey, I can just grow some crops here that I can get some nutrients and nutrition from, and I can raise my own animals here, and that's a lot less harsh of a lifestyle. And so inadvertently, we kind of stopped that evolution of our digestive system, and instead of being these top-level predators, we went to being agriculturalists and like farmers. And so now, at that point, we're eating a lot of both animals and plants. And so our digestive system kind of halted. And it was probably evolving into something that looked more like a carnivore, but it's not anymore. It stopped at this point that is midway. And we introduced agriculture all over the world. We're eating plants and animals, and so that's where we are now. We have now this hybrid digestive system that can tolerate a lot of different things. It can pull nutrients from a lot of different things. But then again, the question is, what is the best thing for us to consume? And it comes back to the things that have the most beneficial nutrients in the form that the body can use with the least toxins, and ideally the things that contribute to fat burning and metabolic flexibility, okay? So this is what we mean by eating for nutrient density, and eating in a way that trains your body how to use fat for fuel. When we say eating for nutrients, we are recommending, although there's a lot of things that we can consume, we recommend getting the things that have the least toxins and the most nutrients. And what are those things? That is our big plate. All right, that is a blend and a mix of animal foods and vegetables and greens, and always using traditional fats. That is where the most beneficial nutrients are going to come from. That's the most nutrient-dense source of nutrients, and it's the things that have the least toxins. Okay. Now, can we eat other things? Can we have celery juices and oatmeal and quinoa and a lot of things that we see people running around trying to do that they think are healthy? Yes, we can do those things, but is that what's optimal? No, what we believe to be optimal is our definition of real food, because it gives us the nutrients that our body needs, and if we eat according to the way that we recommend, we are training the body how to use fat for fuel. So animal foods are a priority. Now, when we say a priority, that does not mean it has to be the majority of what you eat. So we make a huge argument for embracing animal foods simply because most of us are kind of animal food and meat and fat phobic because of the brainwashing that we received for the past 50 years. And so we want to make this big argument so that you can have confidence in understanding that it is a great thing to embrace and eat animal foods. But we're not saying that that has to be the biggest part of what you're eating. What we are saying is they need to be a priority because they are the most direct way to getting the things that this body needs, because we are an animal, and if we eat an animal, we give this animal what it needs to make this animal. And again, that doesn't mean you have to eat a lot. That means that it needs to be a part of the deal. It has to be a priority, okay? Within that realm of animal foods, we talked about ideally you're doing fatty cuts and bone in and skin on, because it has a lot more nutritional value and a lot more things that the body needs to make itself with, right? But you can do whatever you want inside that animal food realm, whatever floats your boat, and there's a lot of room for experimentation. We also talked about nutrient-dense vegetables and greens, and then always making sure that you're using the appropriate fats, traditional fats. The top ones are going to be butter and ghee. You can also use animal fats like lard and tallow and duck fat and lamb fat and chicken fat. And then you can also use things like coconut oil and olive oil and avocado oil, right? So that right there, that big plate, is a nutrient-dense way of eating. And because it excludes our carbohydrates, that big plate is also really good for metabolic efficiency and fat burning, okay? And those are the things the body resonates with, because those are the things that we have co-evolved with eating for 2.5 million years, and especially the past 300,000 years, all right? We are a hybrid digestive system that can eat a lot of different things, but what we really resonate with are animal foods and plant foods and these traditional fats. So what we mean by caloric density and nutrient density is basically saying that this digestive system is geared for those foods. And so if I have access to all these different foods out there, the best things for me to choose are animal foods and plants, and always use appropriate traditional fats. Just to make a small plug for, our carbohydrates, remember we have that smaller plate. Our carbohydrates to us, even though some people may call vegetables carbohydrates, to us carbohydrates are things that are dominant sources of starch and sugar. And so things like sweet potatoes and yams and white rice and potatoes and cassava and taro root, and you could even throw plantains and squashes and things like that in there. These are things that are not very nutrient dense. They are dense in calories because they have a lot of energy from starch and glucose and sugar and stuff like that. So that's why we want to have a rule with those. And because they're not nutrient dense, but they are relatively safe and they're good sources of energy, then they're perfectly fine to have in the diet. And actually, they're very helpful for most of us to have in the diet. We just don't want to have a lot of it because our focus needs to be those nutrient-dense foods, those nutrient-dense powerhouses, animal foods, vegetables, and traditional fats. So with our carbohydrates, our safe starches, and our fruits, we just want to make sure that we're consuming smaller amounts of those. And ideally, we're measuring out 3/4 of a cup of safe starch per day, 3/4 of a cup of fruit per day. I think that's the sweet spot. You can have your sanity, you can have your carbs, but the majority of your foods are coming from that bigger plate. And again, animal foods, vegetables, greens, and traditional fats, right? Also sprinkling in a little bit of full fat dairy, cream in your coffee. By the way, butter, we don't consider full fat dairy. We consider that one of our traditional fats. Full fat dairy, we're talking about like cheeses, yogurts, and cream. So a little bit of dairy, some heavy cream with your coffee, a little bit of cheese with your omelet, some cheese on your salads. Sprinkling that in, we think dairy is extremely helpful. It's got a lot of great beneficial nutrients and some useful fats. Some people just don't do well on it. So again, we want the majority of our meals to come from that big plate, focusing on eating for nutrients versus getting caught up in whatever else craziness there is out there, and understanding that the reason that we choose our definition of real food is because it is the most nutrient dense and metabolically efficient way of eating. It's going to give our bodies what we need to build these amazing bodies, to function properly, and to train the body how to use fat for fuel. I think that's what I want us to understand. I'm sorry, I know that took a little bit for me to get through, but I hope that's a good recap of what I consider to be one of the most important points that I want us to understand and learn, and that is this whole idea around eating for nutrient density, caloric density, and making an argument for our definition of real food, okay? Y'all keep it real. Feedback, questions, comments, concerns, send them my way, all right? And we'll talk to y'all soon.